The first thing you hear when booting up a Metroid game, any Metroid game, is going to be cold and daunting. All the way back to the original NES game, this title screen theme set the tone immediately, one closer to sci-fi horror than the typical space action game of the day. This is one of those rare pieces that I would consider perfect. Every note is placed exactly where it needs to be to create one of the most potent and memorable themes of all time, despite its simplicity, and one that exactly captures the unique feeling of Metroid. There's literally nothing you could remove from this piece without damaging its effect, which could explain its use in the title screens of almost every Metroid game released to date. Everything from the ominous low fifths, the echo effect on the top line, and the emphasized flat sixth scale degree in a minor key give off this aura that is distinctly Metroid. No, it defines the feeling of Metroid in a way that we see carried through the series' soundtracks to this day. In 1986, 2 games were released for the NES, kicking off series that would become 2 of the cornerstones of Nintendo's library up until the present day. I'm of course talking about Metroid and The Legend of Zelda. Both of these NES classics introduced a handful of musical themes that would become series staples, but more importantly, they established the philosophy behind all of the music for each series going forward. It wasn't until both series' Super Nintendo debut, A Link to the Past and Super Metroid respectively, that each's musical identity was set in stone, with each game producing some of the most iconic pieces of music in video game history. To this day, most of the themes associated with these 2 video game legacies originated in their 16-bit forms. That's not to say that the 2 series had similar approaches. While Koji Kondo was crafting triumphant melodies to accompany Link on his quest to save Zelda, Hirokazu "Hip" Tanaka was taking the score for the original Metroid in a completely different direction. Game music was beginning to garner some attention by Japanese media at the time as a respectable new form of music, and many composers tried to take advantage of the spotlight with poppy melodies that appealed to a mass audience. Irritated by the game industry's obsession with upbeat melodicism, Tanaka tried to create the antithesis to this trend with the soundtrack to Metroid, saying in an interview in 2002, "I had a concept that the music for Metroid should be created not as game music, but as music the players feel as if they were encountering a living creature. I wanted to create the sound without any distinctions between music and sound effects. The image I had was, anything that comes out of the game is the sound that game makes." Tanaka goes on to say that he intentionally wrote only one melodic and upbeat tune for the game for after the player defeats Mother Brain, saying, "That's because I wanted only a winner to have a catharsis at the maximum level. For this reason, I decided that melodies should be eliminated during the gameplay." Basically, Tanaka was telling players to get good long before Hidetaka Miyazaki arrived on the scene. While Tanaka never scored another Metroid game, his philosophy behind the game's music is still influencing the series to this day. The line between environmental sounds and music is frequently blurred, from the rain and thunder noises in Super Metroid's Planet Zebes to the drums imitating volcanic rumbling underneath Metroid Prime's Magmoor Caverns. The focus in these and other pieces scoring a specific environment is a dark ambience, Tanaka's alternative to upbeat melodicism. Musically, this kind of ambience is almost always achieved using a low synth bass pedal that swells and fades like the breathing of a living creature, with layers of pads fading in and out on top in dissonant clusters. Metroid Fusion's Sector 3 theme is a great example of this, as synth and choral pads shift over top of a C-sharp bass pedal. The approach is to take notes that don't fit cleanly into the same key and place them right next to each other. For instance, alternating a C-sharp minor triad against a G or B-flat major triad. Juxtaposing these dissonant pairs over top of a constant pedal tone creates a potent, unwavering sense of unease, an effective musical depiction of looming dread. We see the same thing in one of Metroid Prime 3's ambient themes, where a C power chord underscores synth pads that weave in and out, freely using notes from both C major and C minor, sometimes simultaneously, refusing to stick to one consistent tonality. Again, this injects the music with a quiet anxiety, a terrific backdrop to the harsh, lonely worlds that you find yourself exploring in these games. For less ambient and more tonal pieces, we find an edge added to the music via chromaticism, usually meant to make minor key pieces feel even more minor. Kraid's layer theme from the original Metroid makes use of a tonic pedal tone in the key of E minor, with the flat sixth used to imply a dark natural minor sound and a quick flat fifth used for an ominous color. Building up to a climax, we see the tune make use of a flat 2 chord as part of a dark yet colorful E minor, F sharp 7, F, B progression, with these quick 16th note trills and wide bass leaps generating a lot of intensity. The flat 2 chord also appears in slightly more ambient contexts, with Brinstar's Red Soil Wetland area from Super Metroid basing its theme entirely off of this 2 chord vamp from E flat sus to F flat major 13. While never made explicit in the accompaniment, the melody betrays the piece's E flat minor tonality. This piece was reworked for Metroid Prime 2's Torvus Bog Submerged level, as well as Samus Return's lower Brinstar theme. I love the way these tunes build such a colorful, beautiful chord off of such a dissonant root note. Rather than sounding just sinister or brooding, the major 7th and 13th give this flat 2 chord some melancholy. A more sinister and brooding variation of this musical idea can be found in Super Metroid's Norfair Ancient Ruins theme. This piece is largely driven by the same half-step bass motion, though harmonized this time for the most part as a major 1 chord and an inverted minor flat 7 chord. The oppressive atmosphere provided by this vamp, along with the heavy use of the flat 2 in the melody, is augmented by transposing the whole piece up in minor thirds every 8 bars throughout. This helps to keep stability to a minimum. You may recognize this theme as it's become kind of the series staple for extremely hot areas, notably from Metroid Prime's Magmore Caverns, Samus Return's various hot rooms, and it even appears in Nintendo Land. If there's one last element that I think gives Metroid its truly unique musical character, it's the way that these games use heroic musical conventions intertwined with the brooding ambient techniques that we've covered so far. The ambience in these games makes sense. The Metroid series is known for its themes of isolation and exploration of labyrinthine environments. The darkness in the music augments the elements of horror that have always been present in the series. There has always been grotesque visual design as well as an attempt to make the player feel powerless, stranded all alone on an alien world, having just lost all of the high-tech space tools that you need to survive. But at the end of the day, Samus does always triumph, and there's a drive behind all the ambience, an optimism underneath the dissonance that puts the last piece of the puzzle into place. Look at Brinstar from the original Metroid. The driving triplet bassline set against these 16th note flourishes in the melody, as well as these major chords borrowed from the tune's parallel minor key, these are textbook Zelda music tropes. That's not to say this piece is without a unique Metroid tinge. Pay attention to how this borrowed chord feels in this 2 chord vamp, the B flat sus 2. First of all, if this were a more generically adventurous game like Zelda or a Pokemon, this would be a major flat 7 chord rather than a flat 3 sus2. They're both borrowed from the parallel minor key, but the flat 7 sounds just a shade less dark. Here, listen to how Ocarina of Time's Hyrule Field theme would sound with this chord progression rather than its original 1 to flat 7 vamp. It just has a little bit more of an edge, doesn't it? Keeping the harmony to simple triads generally sounds more straightforward, but using a sus2 chord here rather than a straight B-flat major lends a little bit of depth to the progression. While the Brinstar theme hasn't been explicitly carried on throughout the series' scores, its attitude has. The same march-based rhythm, the dissonance between triplet and 16th note subdivisions, stable chord tone-focused melodies, and the kind of mode mixture I outlined earlier, these are all elements that you find permeating Zelda and other heroic music, especially from Nintendo's first-party games. These elements show up again and again in Metroid soundtracks, cutting through the thick soundscapes the same way Samus cuts through these alien planets. Going back to Norfair Ancient Ruins, or its younger brother Magmoor Caverns, we see these rhythmic elements incorporated alongside the ominous chromatic harmony I mentioned before, with galloping 16th and straight 8th note figures clashing with driving triplet rhythms in the bass. It's the combination of all of these elements that give the piece that Metroid feel, and I think it contributes to why this theme is one of the more popular and emblematic of the series as a whole. The theme of Super Metroid is another example of everything we've laid out so far. A minor key bass vamp with the flat 6th putting us squarely in a natural minor sound, playing out underneath this soaring semitone cluster in a high choral synth before a melody comes in that could not be described as anything but heroic. The brass synth, the heavy emphasis on the root and 5th, the dotted 8th to 16th note rhythms sprinkled in, divorced from the surrounding accompaniment, this melody just screams heroism. Metroid Prime's Talon 4 theme incorporates Brinstar's theme more directly, taking the exact same 1 to flat 3 sus2 vamp, but it amplifies both the heroic nature of that piece as well as some of the ambient techniques we've mentioned previously. The theme opens up with a continuous pedaled G in the bass, before a synth line floats in over top that moves from the major third to the minor third, confusing our sense of key. Unlike the previous examples of the same technique, however, this time the line is foreshadowing the harmonic motion to come. Our much talked about G to B flat sus2 vamp, this time placed over a continuous bass pedal. This moves into a new melody over the same progression, one that makes even more deliberate use of heroic tropes. The 16th note run up to the 5th of our B-flat chord, and these quarter note triplets feel like they were ripped straight from a Hyrule Field, or the main theme from Pokemon. The theme continues to balance between more explicitly upbeat and heroic sounding sections and darker, more ambient sections, treading the line carefully to create the tone that we all associate with the Metroid series. I like to think that this approach is representative of the tone of the series as a whole. While these games do frequently deal with themes of isolation, powerlessness, and horror, that's not all there is to them. When you're first dropped into one of these alien worlds, even figuring out where to go next can seem incredibly daunting. But by the end of each game, the player has learned how to navigate these areas, Samus has regained her abilities, and after a badass display of shooting some ungodly monster in the face, each of these games all end in triumph. The dark atmosphere that cloaks these games make the victories seem all the sweeter, giving players who make it to the end the maximum level of catharsis, just as Hirokazu Tanaka intended way back in 1986. I hope this could provide some insight into just what makes Metroid music sound the way that it does. I want to thank patron Patrick Baker Malo for the suggestion. If you'd like to join Pat here in supporting this channel, feel free to go check out my Patreon here. There are lots of rewards for being a patron, like getting these videos a couple days early, having access to all of the transcriptions for music that I made for this video, and the ability to request topics like good old Pat here. If you want to follow me on Twitter, you can find me at 8BitMusicTheory. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.